Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Heir's Lair. I'm your host, Jonathan Taylor, and as you can see, I once again have a special guest with me in the lair. Special guest, please introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm G.R. Halliday, and that's my writing name. I'm also known as Gareth Halliday to friends, so that includes all of you, hopefully.
Okay, we'll see. Now, given now, Garrett, I think you mentioned you are a crime writer.
Hmm.
So as such, we might touch upon some controversial topics. You know, topics that are worth that are worth killing people over. As such, I have to ask: is there anything you don't want to talk about over the course of this interview?
Um, Nothing that comes to mind immediately, so we can follow that as we go along.
Okay. Uh, just so you know, if any question makes you uncomfortable, you can just say you don't you don't want to answer it. And if you're lucky,
That's cool.
I
That's
might
good to
actually
me.
oblige. So you said you were a you write crime novels. Did you start with novels or did you start with short stories?
I wrote, yeah, I started out doing some short stories. Like I think short stories are quite a good way to kind of hone your craft as a writer. Are you a writer, Jonathan, or how did you
Yes.
come to? Yeah, yeah. Do you write short stories, or or you, have you written novels, or did you start with short stories yourself?
I have some short stories under my belt, but those will never see the light of
Hmm.
day.
Okay, yeah. For me, like I thought, I started out with short stories 'cause I thought, doing a short story, it kind of gives you the opportunity to really um, get used to writing a beginning, a middle, and an ending. And so I started out with short stories. None of them have seen the light of day either. I kind of moved on quite quickly to writing novels. So, but yeah, I started with short stories.
What drew you towards longer form fiction?
I think longer fiction has a market, there isn't really a market for short stories. Like, I think if it was possible to kind of build a career out of writing short stories, it's possible I would have gone that way. But in Britain anyway, I don't know what it's like in Germany, but in Britain, people don't really buy short stories. So I was kind of, for that reason, drawn to writing longer form fiction. And also, I just think there's something like I like the fact that in fiction you get drawn into a world and you can kind of explore that world and kind of build it. So I really enjoy that side of writing fiction. So that's probably why I was drawn to writing the longer novels. Also, like as a kid, it was like I enjoyed short stories, like especially like kind of folk tales and um, like fairy tales, that kind of short story. But I was really drawn into like longer fiction, like Lord of the Rings, that type of thing, like and things that you could kind of imagine yourself really being in the world. So I kind of wanted to, not replicate Lord of the Rings or something because that's not exactly crime fiction,
You want to
but
replicate the sensation, that
something like that,
the exploration, the
Yeah.
discovery, the stuff like that.
Yeah, that kind of thing. I think like just immersing yourself in the world, like your version of a world. So I think that's what drew me to that.
People read anthologies of short stories, so
Hmm.
you could get into that. And in fact, right beside me, I
Alexei
have
Sale's a good example of that.
in fact right beside me, I have one of the best examples in modern fiction.
The Witcher,
Yeah.
excellent. It's a Polish writer, is that correct?
Yep. Fun fact: when he initially sold the rights to his
Mm.
to his property to the video game studio that developed the video games, to CD Projekt Red to develop the video games, he settled on a flat fee rather than a commission per sale because he figured that's how he would get more money. And then come the third game, he found out he would have gotten more money if he if he went with a commission. So now he's kind of
I've
trying
heard
to.
this story.
So yeah, now he's kind of trying to, uh, you know, suit him out of it. If I recall correctly.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
It happens. Uh, any? Do you have any novels or any projects coming down the pipeline eventually?
This is my current novel is Under the Marsh, which has just been published by in the UK by Vintage,
Okay.
and I'm not sure when there's a German version, but I'm not sure when it's going to be out. I think it'll maybe be a year or something like that, maybe a bit less. I'm not certain. I don't know the title yet. My first two novels are out in Germany.
Hmm.
Uh,
Well,
and
I could think of a potential translation, but I'm not gonna but I'm not gonna give it to you. Also, this video isn't just for German audiences. It's basically it's basically international.
okay,
Most of my viewers I think are based in the U.S.
okay. Yes, this
and
is from the UK. I'm from Scotland and
yeah, I
the
could
Scottish Islands. So,
yeah. Also, most of my Twitter
uh,
followers are U.S. as well.
okay. Hi,
Because I
everyone.
know yeah because I know people will ask uh, why don't you introduce your furry companion?
This is Minnie. Her it's short for Moonchild,
Okay.
which is a she doesn't really deserve that name because Moonchild sounds like quite an elegant name, and she is not an elegant cat. She's a little savage. Like she'll kind of launch, like if you're walking through a room randomly, she'll kind of launch herself across the room and just like stick her claws into any part of you. So I've had her kind of like just sticking her claws into my head basically, and like walking around with a fur hat on there. So
Yeah. Okay.
uh, she's yeah desperate for attention at all times. Like, so, uh,
That sounds very enjoyable. You said that you were interested in longer form fiction because you wanted to, flesh out the world.
hmm.
What does that process look like to you? Where do you begin? Do you begin with the world? Do you begin with the plot? Do you begin with the characters?
For me, like I don't think you can separate the world from your personality in a weird way. You know, it's like when I was a kid, I grew up in Edinburgh in Scotland, and I used to live opposite a graveyard randomly when up until I was about three, and I think that kind of went into me in some strange way. This kind of like just looking. I can remember being like a young child and just looking out across at this graveyard and kind of being intrigued by it in a strange way. And then when I was throughout my childhood, my dad was really interested in paranormal things like UFOs, ghosts, stuff like that. He used to investigate all these kind of like unexplained, excuse me, phenomenon and write books about it. So our house when I was growing up was just like full of loads of uh, bookshelves with like books about ghosts, unexplained mysteries, UFOs, all like. And when you're surrounded by that as a child, like I would just kind of like go take a book off the shelf, read about it, and it would tell me that there was some like spirit somewhere, like a UFO that had appeared. And when you're a kid, you don't really have the ability to differentiate fact from reality as such. So anything that's presented to me anyway, I would just kind of take it as reality. So I spent my childhood in this kind of weird limbo between like fact and reality, where I was like almost like a kind of scary world in itself of like ghosts, UFOs, and all that. So that kind of formed like the psychological background to my writing, and uh, like obviously as I became older, I kind of left that behind, but I kind of dip into that strange kind of world somewhere between um, fact and fiction. When I'm writing books, I'll kind of go in there and try and re-experience what it feels like to be in that world where it's like ghosts and so on, or might be possible. As I've got older, I've kind of um, like just for my psychological health, it's like easier not to believe in ghosts and like UFOs and stuff. It's less scary. So I've kind of left that behind, but um, I kind of dip into that um, for the world that I build in my fiction.
Okay, that's that's interesting. Uh, what I guess my question kind of still stands. That you do use that to build your world, but well, how do the other aspects of your stories
Ah,
contribute?
okay. Like how do I kind of do it? Yeah, it's like for me, it's just kind of writing every day, just that's the kind of background. And then every day I get up, first thing in the morning, and I'll just kind of sit down and write for at least a couple of hours. And I'll do like a minimum of like like I aim like absolute minimum if I've got like a bad hangover or just like not feeling well, I'll do 500 words. But ideally, I'll do more like 1,000 or whatever. And for me, it's just about getting the first draft down. And like, I don't plan my writing out. I just kind of, write. And so the first draft will usually be um, not, it'll be quite rough. And then I'll try and kind of polish that up a little bit in the second draft. And um, yeah, hopefully get somewhere eventually. When it comes to like the characters, like I always feel like for me, I try not to be too hard. Like I'll just let the characters kind of rise up from the story themselves as much as possible, which sounds kind of pretentious, but it's like if I try to be too rough with the characters and kind of force them to fulfill a certain role, it usually makes the book a bit disjointed. So I'll try and just let the characters um, emerge as much as is possible.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yeah, I would say it does. Next question is I'm mainly hoping that we can use Under the Marsh as a reference point for this one, but you can use any of your other ones if you'd
Mm.
prefer. Does Under the Marsh have any deleted scenes, as it were? What did they consist of, and why did you delete it?
All my books, like what I'll do when I'm writing a book is like on the second draft, I'll go through and there will be like whole chunks that I'll just cut out and I put them into a separate document because it's like it quite often be scenes I really like and then things I love about a character or something. And I've always named the document things to be saved for later or things I might go back to. And like I don't think I've ever gone back to look at any of those documents, unfortunately, because it's like I could have spent like weeks of my life kind of trying to write these sections that just get thrown in the trash, basically. Um, so all the writing a book is about kind of like splurging into this kind of mess and making a mess and then honing that down. And I feel like with books, like a lot of the time when you're honing it down, you're kind of making it like less specifically yours and a bit more generic, like more of a kind of generic story, slightly with what you take out, just because um, you're trying, you generally you're kind of trying to make it easier for the reader. So a lot of the kind of fine points that end up getting cut out and put away. I can't think of any specific, like I'm sure like if I thought about it for a long time, there would definitely be scenes that I'd really wanted to. Actually, in my first novel, now I'm talking about it, there was a scene that I spent probably like months and years going over and over, and it was a scene about a young man getting who gets abducted. He walks up to a van and gets abducted at the back of the van. That's my first novel, which is called From the Shadows. And um, like I think it was like one of my best pieces of writing because it was so frightening and so kind of well put together. But in the end, it didn't kind of fit the story, so I had to take it out. And it still kind of, exists somewhere in a document. But so yeah, that's probably the out of all my books, that's the scene that I had to chop out and would have liked to have used.
You mentioned that a lot of the changes you make uh, are so the books become more palatable for larger audience, and is mostly
Mm.
I imagine it's mostly personal stuff about the characters. Does any of what you write does any of what you delete still factor into what gets in the published release? Like, for example, you mentioned that this character uh, has, I don't know, an allergy to something, or spent a few years fencing as a child, but then you don't mention it in the story, but you still have it in mind that because this character has done fencing, they would react to a situation in a specific way, as opposed to any other.
Yeah, like I think when you're writing the first draft of a novel, you're telling yourself a story, and then when you edit it out, you're kind of telling someone else's story. And it's like quite often with writing, there's like a lot of information that you need to know as the writer as you're getting to know a character, which actually the audience don't really need to know. It's like you want to know it because you kind of like think as you're writing, you think, well, why would the character do all these things? Like, and wouldn't they think of that? Wouldn't they think of that? Wouldn't they think of that? When you go back to redraft, it's kind of like you're taking all of that out because what the reader needs to know is like a lot less because your readers like are generally a lot more intuitive and a lot cleverer than you kind of imagine them to be when you're writing your first draft, and readers like really enjoy it when they kind of put the pieces together for themselves. It's like when you get spoon fed, if I spoon feed you a story, it's like you don't enjoy it as much. Like if I say, Jonathan, I was kind of out and this happened and then that happened, and you kind of put those two parts together and kind of understand what's going to happen next.
Yeah,
You'll enjoy that more than a story than if I tell you every detail of the story. It's hard to know like exactly how many details to leave in because sometimes it's good to have a little detail, because it kind of if you don't have enough details in the story, then it kind of what would you say? Like if there aren't enough details in there, then it can be a bit bland.
yeah,
But if there are too many details in there, then it starts to become um, a bit fussy. And it's like everyone's different how much they want. Some people want like a really elaborate, interesting story with lots of different parts put together. Someone else likes, a really basic story that's just this happened and that happened and that happened. And in that way,
yeah.
everyone's different. So it's hard to say exactly what's right for you might not be right for me when it comes to.
You kind of have to guess, depending on what you on how you think it would fit in the finished product. I think it's the
Something
safest way
like
to
that,
say.
yeah. Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. Uh, Next up, is there any aspect of writing or any aspect of a text that you particularly enjoy writing?
It's always the part that I'm not doing, if that makes sense. So, like when I'm writing the first draft, I always think, I wish I could be editing now because I would have a better idea and then I could polish everything up. And then when I'm editing, I always think, oh, it's so much nicer to be writing the first draft because you can just kind of write a page and not think too much about it. Um, on balance, I would say my favorite part is once I've done a couple of drafts and I have a rough, like, I don't plan what I'm writing. So I'll just kind of write and then write and then write. And that you can spend a lot of time doing that. And it's a lot of energy gets expended doing that. But then it's a real privilege when you get to go back and kind of hone it down. I think that's probably my favorite part is when you've got like a rough idea for your story and a rough, you've done that you've done a draft or maybe two drafts, and the story's there, and then you can kind of take a step back and just trim it down so it makes it a lot more special and a lot more bring out the best parts of it, something like that. So I would say probably round about the third draft is, once you know the story quite well and you're just honing the final parts to make it as good as it can possibly be. For me, that's the best bit.
It turns out I have to reword this question because pretty much a lot of people when I ask this question they always go to the process.
Hmm.
I actually mean elements like story elements like dialogue or
Ah,
description
okay.
or action scenes or something like that. So
Yeah. What? Yeah, that's interesting. Like, it's really intriguing because I was thinking about this today, actually. Like, how do you break down a novel? Like, do you focus on the specific parts, like dialogue, character, plot, or do you focus on the whole? And I think for me, I generally like I'm much more of someone who focuses on the whole, and that means I can get drawn in too much on the first draft. But in terms of my favorite bits to write, I think like I enjoy writing dialogue probably the best, just because it's snappier, and yeah. So if I was to choose one part, it would be dialogue for me.
okay. Uh, is there any part of your writing that you dread uh, having to approach?
I don't dread any of it, but I think like the part that kind of feels heavy is when a lot of it can feel quite heavy when you're filling in sections of your novel. Like say like on the first draft, you know that you're going from like someone's talking to that you have to have a scene where your main character is interacting with another person to get some information, but you're not sure what that character is, and you're not sure what the information is, and so it can all feel like very it can feel a bit heavy, like grinding through that. And so yeah, I would say that when you're not sure where exactly you're going, and you know that you're going to need an intermediary character to do something, and they don't feel alive at all. It's like you're talking to a corpse or something.
Yeah.
That can feel quite hard. Um, and the answer to that for me is just to kind of give it some space and time, and then hopefully that person will start to develop a character that can, because quite often those characters can become like interesting, if you give them a bit of space and time.
Yeah. Uh, given your books have have translations,
Hmm.
I assume you are traditionally published. Am I wrong in assuming that?
Yeah, I'm published by a company called Vintage, which is part of Penguin Random House in the UK.
Okay. Did you always want to go the traditional publishing route, uh, or did you at least initially intend to self-publish, or how did you uh,
Yeah, I want like
how are you how did it come that you interacted with Vintage?
so for me, like I, when I was aged about 30, I felt like I want to write a book, and so this was like 10 years ago. And even then, like it was like a lot harder to kind of self-publish, or you could do it actually, because my dad, like literally about 30 years ago, self-published a book about UFOs. And back then it was called vanity publishing,
Yeah.
which means like publishing out of vanity, so it was like a different world then, because you would have to kind of invest some money and so on if you wanted to publish a book. So like I used to work in bookshops when I was a teenager, so I had a kind of a traditional mindset towards publishing, and like I'd always wanted to write a book, and then I got to the age of about 30 and thought, well, this would be a good time if I'm gonna write a book. I should just sit down and write every day, and then get this book published. And so I wrote the first draft of my novel and sent it to an agent down in London. I live in the Scottish Highlands, and so I was quite remote from the publishing industry. It wasn't kind of um, I didn't have any contacts or know anyone in publishing or anything like that. And yeah, like an agent when I sent it was kind of interested in my writing, and so we had a bit of back and forth and just kind of worked on my novel, and then they submitted it to some of the big publishers in um, the UK, and I had a few publishers to choose from. So like I'd always had a thing about Vintage because Vintage published published a lot of Scandi crime, a lot of Swedish crime. Like, and I'm a big fan of
Okay.
Swedish crime. I love like Stieg Larsson and Wallander and The Bridge, like those that TV program, The Bridge and The Killing. I don't know if they're big in America, but in Britain they were like really big thing. And Vintage published a lot of those types of kind of Swedish novels. So when I knew they were interested in me, like I really wanted to go with them.
Okay. Uh, how did you how did you process the initial reception of your books? Like, well, was it what you
Uh,
expected, or did you or did you catch up on some things that you realized you did poorly and figured should do differently next time?
it's a really weird thing, It's like I think to get to the point of being published by um like a mainstream publisher, you have to there'll be a lot of criticism that comes your way before, because you're going to speak to like lots of editors, an agent, and all that, who will be kind of saying like you need to do this, you need to do that, um, and so like that feels quite weird at first. Like if you're, you know, just someone else like going through your writing with a fine tooth comb. Writing is such a solitary pursuit. It's like you're sitting on your own for like a long time, making stuff up basically. So then to have someone else kind of start looking at that and kind of piecing it apart and having opinions on it feels quite weird. Um, and then, but it's still kind of contained. Once your book goes out into the public and people get a chance to dig into it, and I don't like. I've always tried not to pay too much attention to what people think of my books, like reviewer, like on Amazon or something like that. If it's in a newspaper or something, I'll kind of read it and you know, but like I think yeah, I think it's best. Like one of the first things my agent said to me was, "Don't read reviews on Amazon." So
Yeah.
I think that's quite good advice because some people can really get drawn into that world and like find it quite a hurtful thing. But you can also get like drawn into people telling you your books are great and so on. It's like I think it's better to just if it's people really close to you, like your other writers that you know personally and really trust, then listen to them, listen to your friends and family, and your other people who kind of want you to do well, like your agent and
Yeah.
your publisher. It's like worth listening to them. But when it comes to like some random person who's on Amazon and told you that you're giving you 1 star and said your book's like complete shit or whatever, then it's probably best not to listen to them.
Okay. I'm gonna ask the same question, but a little bit focus shifted, because this question kind of focused on what it was, on what your reception was like, on what the reception was, on how you process the way the text was received. Now I
Hmm.
want to know how do you, your opinion on the publishing process itself change, over the over the course of over the
Hmm.
release of your books? Were there any teachable moments there?
I don't think I don't think there was anything that really surprised me about it, to be honest. Like I think I'm trying to think of anything that was really would really be useful. I would say I think with publishing, like you never really know, the outcomes are so random, it's like you just never know what's going to happen with your book. I would say that the level of randomness is quite high, and that's not necessarily to do with me, but just from people I've met in publishing. It's like I've met people who have had their a friend of mine, I won't use their name, but they got their publishing deal cancelled by one imprint, and then shortly afterwards got a new deal with another imprint, and it turned into a bestseller. So I would say like publishing is like really, really random. Like so, there's absolutely no guarantees in any way. Um, so I think that's probably like the biggest takeaway for me is just that if you want to be involved in publishing, you have to be able to kind of accept how random and uncertain it is. Like there's a film director. I can't remember his name, but he's the guy who um, wrote Glengarry, the movie Glengarry Glen Ross. I've forgotten his name right now, but he's a kind of genius of American film. And he says that the main reason people drop out of the creative industries is because they can't handle the uncertainty. And that's completely true, I would say, in publishing. It's like nothing's ever going to be certain. You never know whether people are going to like your book or not like your book. You never know like what's going to happen with the next. Are you going to be able to write the next book? What's going to happen for you? So I think when you're an aspiring author, you have a certain sense that once you get your book published, you're kind of going to feel like better because it's quite psychological. It's like, why do we write books? Like, is it because we want to feel like, do we want to share something? Do we want, it's like a personal
Yeah.
quest, in a way, and it's like every quest, everything that we do essentially is a bit unsatisfying when we attain it. And publishing is no different in that way. So
Yeah.
if you want to kind of be involved in the publishing industry, it's waiting, it's uncertainty. So if you can handle the uncertainty and the waiting and so on, then um, it's brilliant. But if you're kind of like some people get chewed up by that, it's like it can make you anxious. So I think that's one of the most interesting things about it for me.
Okay. Uh, I'm gonna jump back a bit from my from my typical list of questions. You mentioned friends and family already. Do any of your
Mm.
friends and family know of your writing career, and how do they approach it, or how did they
Yeah,
approach
that,
you?
yeah, they all know about it, and they've been like they've all been very supportive, I would say. Um, Trying to think of, yeah, like I don't know if any of them are big. Like my mum says she's a big fan of my writing. She's like probably my most avid reader, so she'll like read my books a lot. And yeah, like every one of some of my friends and family don't read my books at all. But they all know about that I've got kind of books out there. But um, my partner, Sarah, I rely on her quite a lot just to kind of read my books and tell me if they're good or bad. Every writer has that moment when it's like you've finished your novel, like whether it's kind of, the first thing you've ever written, or if you've written a whole bunch of novels and had them published. Um, that first moment of kind of giving your novel to someone else to read, every author feels kind of a bit needy in that moment, probably, and a bit like vulnerable, you know.
Yeah.
So for me, I'll kind of give it to my partner, and um, she'll try and be nice about it, and then it'll go out in the world to my agent, whatever, and she'll tell me the truth, or like this
Yeah.
needs a lot of work. So
Okay.
yeah.
I've kind of put the squeeze on you over the past uh, 35 minutes, let's say. So I'm gonna give you the chance to retaliate, so to speak. So, of all the questions you've heard so far, is there any you would want me to
Hmm.
answer?
I just want to know where you're at with your books. What are your ambitions for writing? Where do you see yourself now, and where do you want to be in a few years?
I'm currently writing the first draft of the second book of a 7 book series. Like that.
Mm.
That's where I'm at right now. So yeah, I really hope I can, uh, get all 7 books out and and eventually start making a living out of off of writing. Not just writing these 7 books, but maybe also something else. Maybe also for other media, like I don't know,
Mm.
maybe writing for television or something like
Mm.
that. That's something I
Um,
that's something I would look forward to.
what genre? Can I ask what genre you're writing
Action adventure fantasy.
in? Mm.
Right now, it's primarily aimed at uh, YA audiences.
Mm.
Though I've noticed my style is a bit tamer compared to the average of that age range. When looking at the topics I'm actually addressing, I think that's where that's where it should be for now. Eventually
Mm.
I would my though I will age I will age these topics up because the characters themselves also uh, age up, and they will encounter different you know different issues. Their perspectives will change,
Mm.
and and uh, people around them and the ways they relate to the world
Mm.
will also change, and that is something I want to explore.
You can kind of grow up with the characters almost in a way.
Um, maybe less in my case because I'm already a grown ass man. Though I could still have
We can
some.
always grow. There's always
Yeah,
like some new
there's always some
things to
new
understand
level of
about
maturity
ourselves.
to be attained. But if there is, but if there is some young lady out there who will in a decade or two's time say that these books uh, uh, were formative books for her childhood experience or for her teenage years, and that she figured out what it means to when that she figured out what it means to be a real adult from
Mm.
from that. First of all, I hope she has more role models than just the ones I've provided for her.
Mm.
Second of all, I'd be very glad.
And do you write in English or in German?
English.
Hmm. Taylor's an English name. Are you
This
a
is my
Scottish
pseudonym.
name?
This is my writing pseudonym.
Okay.
My actual name is neither English nor German.
Okay.
Okay,
I'm
and
intrigued, but I won't ask any further.
yeah, you've asked quite a bit. That's okay. Before we close out, uh, is there is there any link you would like to plug or shout out? Is there any place you'd
Just my
want
book,
to? Where can people find you in general?
Under the Marsh. I'm on social media, Twitter, GR Halliday,
Okay.
social media, Twitter and Instagram and so forth. Yeah, my book should be available online as well. And yeah, thanks for having me. It's been great to talk to you, Jonathan.
And thanks for agreeing to show up. And thank you to everyone who has been patient enough to suffer through through 40 minutes of the two of us just kind of rambling about. If you also enjoyed it, then please leave a like and maybe even share this video wherever you think other people will like it as well. If you have anything you'd like to add to what you just heard, the comment section awaits your input. And if you want to see when my next video gets released, well then please subscribe. Ideally also ring the bell or do whatever else YouTube will ask of you in order to keep you notified. My debut book, Heir to the Empire: The Next Generation, is available at most major book retailers under a master link in the description down below, which I suggest you check out. Also down below you will find Gareth's links as well as my own, and I suggest you check those out as well should you feel so inclined. Until next time, I am Jonathan Taylor, and this has been the Heir's Lair. Once again, thank you, Gareth, for your participating.